the episode that was banned from Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C. For decades, Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C., stood as one of television's most innocently beloved sitcoms, a light-hearted look at military life through the wide-eyed lens of Jim Nabors' sweet, bumbling Southern character. But buried beneath its goofy charm and patriotic themes lies a decades-old whisper, a missing episode, a reel that aired once in 1966, then vanished, stripped from syndication, ignored by retrospectives, and quietly removed from DVD box sets. CBS has never acknowledged it. The show's creators have never explained it, but fans insist something was lost. Why was an episode of Gomer Pyle allegedly banned? And what happened to the tape? Let's rewind to the night the laughter stopped. By the summer of 1966, Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C., was a certified television phenomenon. Having spun off from The Andy Griffith Show, it offered American households a gentler, sillier take on military life during a time when real-world conflict, namely Vietnam, was escalating by the day. Its protagonist, Gomer Pyle, was the very antithesis of the war machine, naive, courteous, and endlessly optimistic. Audiences adored him. The show, which had debuted in 1964, was in the middle of its third season by the fall of 1966. Its formula was airtight. Gomer bungled orders, frustrated his drill sergeant, and somehow, always, saved the day. Episodes typically centered on harmless misunderstandings and moral lessons, a deliberate departure from the violence and trauma of actual military service. Jim Nabors' signature catchphrase, "Well, golly," became a national mantra for innocence. And then there was Camp Later. At least, that's what fans would later call it. No such title appears in official CBS listings. No such episode is included in syndication packages or home releases. But in obscure fan circles, a specific plotline has persisted for decades. An episode in which Gomer Pyle is temporarily transferred to a remote base called Camp Later, where he becomes entangled in a bizarre chain of command. Unlike other episodes, the tone is said to shift. Less slapstick, more unsettling. Rumors describe Gomer witnessing military experiments, undergoing a strange psychological evaluation, and even questioning his role as a Marine. One fan, a former military brat named Dennis Albright, claimed in a 2003 web forum post that he distinctly remembered watching the episode during a rerun on a local affiliate in Texas in the early 1970s. According to his account, the plot involved Gomer being mistakenly enrolled in a behavioral compliance program after flunking a written test. The program's purpose? To recondition soldiers with unorthodox attitudes. There was no laugh track for the second half, Albright wrote. It was like watching The Twilight Zone with a character from Hee Haw stuck inside. Another post, this one from an anonymous archivist claiming to have worked with CBS's digitization efforts in the 1990s, mentioned an unlabeled 16mm reel logged under the code GP67X. The reel, they claimed, was stored in a non-standard category alongside promotional outtakes and error footage. When it was screened for verification, the technician allegedly noted anomalous tonal shift and viewer discomfort, recommending that the content be flagged as unsuitable for public release. Whether or not any of this is true remains hotly contested. CBS has never confirmed the existence of an unaired or suppressed episode of Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C. The show's official episode guide lists no gaps in its 150-episode run, but several key anomalies remain unexplained. Airing logs from a 1966 affiliate in Raleigh, North Carolina, list a now unknown episode code in November of that year, 1 week with no title, simply labeled Gomer Special. Moreover, the transition between episodes 10 and 12 in Season 3 has long been criticized by fans for its abrupt continuity shift. Gomer returns to Camp Henderson behaving slightly more subdued. There is no mention of the prior week's events. So, what happened? Was Camp Later a shelved experiment in darker storytelling? An ill-fated attempt to introduce psychological realism into a show built on fantasy? Or was it simply an apocryphal tale, misremembered television that never truly existed? The real story, as always, lies in the gaps. And those gaps only grow deeper as we look at what followed the alleged broadcast. If there's any truth to the legend of the banned episode, The first real clue came not from CBS, but from a surprising source: a sudden scheduling shift. In November 1966, Gomer Pyle was scheduled to air its 11th episode of the season. According to listings published in TV Guide and various local newspapers, the episode title was Gomer the Good Samaritan, a standard-sounding entry. Yet the episode that eventually aired bore no resemblance to its description. Instead, the broadcast featured an earlier rerun, Season 2's Gomer Mines His Sergeant's Apartment. That would seem like an ordinary programming hiccup, but it wasn't, because no official records exist of an episode titled Gomer the Good Samaritan. No scripts, no synopses, no production stills. CBS, when asked in a 1997 retrospective interview for TV Land, simply stated that title was likely a placeholder. But in 1966, TV Guide rarely misprinted. And this wasn't a one-off error. 4 different regional editions listed the same non-existent episode that week. In some, the description was even detailed. Gomer Pyle, Jim Neighbors, is reassigned to a military installation upstate, where his honesty causes unforeseen problems. The description aligns, eerily, with elements of the rumored Camp Later episode. And that week's abrupt rerun was followed by a week-long pause in Gomer Pyle's release schedule, a rare move at the time for a high-performing show. When the series returned 2 weeks later, the tone was back to normal. Jim Neighbors delivered his lines with cheerful naivete. The laugh track returned. But among die-hard fans, something felt off. Sergeant Carter's aggression was subdued. Gomer seemed less wide-eyed. One scene showed him waking up from a dream and muttering, "I guess it's good to be back." The line was played for laughs, but to those who believed in the lost episode, it felt like a quiet acknowledgement. To date, there's been no official confirmation that Gomer the Good Samaritan, or Camp Later, ever existed. But if nothing unusual occurred during that stretch in 1966, why did the network pause? Why did 4 TV Guide listings describe a non-existent episode in identical detail? And why has CBS never addressed those questions directly? Throughout the 1970s and 80s, Gomer Pyle enjoyed a steady afterlife in syndication. It became a staple of afternoon television, especially in rural markets where nostalgia for military comedies remained strong. Jim Neighbors moved on to other projects. The laughter lived on. But somewhere along the way, something changed. In 1989, a syndicated episode list was published in a collector's edition of TV Heaven magazine. Curiously, the list included only 149 episodes, not 150, as previously believed. One entry, wedged between Duke Slater, nightclub comic, and Gomer and the Dragon Lady, was marked as unaired, withheld. The footnote simply read, "Production date discrepancy, possibly an internal screen test. Lost to vault edits." The brief line sparked years of debate. Could this missing episode be Camp Later? In the decades that followed, collectors and researchers scoured VHS recordings from across the country, hoping to uncover local broadcasts or rare promotional reels. So far, no full footage has emerged, but tantalizing hints remain. Clipped dialogue, production stills with unfamiliar set pieces, even a grainy audio recording of Gomer saying, "What kind of Marine needs to be reprogrammed, Sergeant?" The line has never appeared in any known episode. And if that tape exists, then the story of a banned episode may be more than just myth. By the late 1960s, scripts for television series like Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C. were typically preserved in studio archives for writers, future production reference, or legal documentation. When fans and researchers began searching in the early 2000s, however, something peculiar emerged. A gap. The episode code, believed to correspond to the alleged Camp Later installment, commonly referred to as GP67X, or Gomer the Good Samaritan, had no script in the CBS archives, the Writers Guild archives, or protected collections at UCLA's Film and Television Archive. 4 tracking databases independently confirmed the anomaly. This absence widened when cameos and prop stills failed to surface. A researcher from the Classic TV Documentation Project discovered photographs labeled Camp Later Set, showing Gomer in military fatigues in an unfamiliar barracks hallway, with psychologists and censored signage in the background. But those images abruptly ended without credit, and subsequent production logs returned to familiar sets and caricatured military camp. No listing mentions a behavioral or psychological unit within Camp Henderson. Meanwhile, a document surfaced, an internal memo from CBS dated December 1966, marking several script files as pending review. One line, blacked out in red pencil, hints at unresolved tonality concerns. Another line crossed out an entire interchange in Gomer's dialogue, with the editor's handwritten note, "Remove speculation on procedure." These notations imply someone wanted, but did not want recorded, dialogue referencing military practices or psychological testing. A veteran TV script supervisor, now retired, spoke anonymously to a podcast in 2019. She said she remembered Gomer filming something unlike any other show they'd done. She described dialogue referencing reconditioned compliance. She thought it might have been a one-off gag, but when the scene went under review, the memo came down, cut by executive order. There are also rumored screenwriters' drafts written on Camp Henderson forms, strict disciplinary-looking worksheets with evaluation boxes and checkboxes marked for behavior readiness and attitude orientation. These drafts, never fully typed, were found among folder scraps in a collector's estate sale in Ohio. One script page carries Gomer's name followed by the note, "Approved for transfer to camp later for reassessment." Below, scribbled, "Does the episode push boundaries? Too serious?" Written evidence may be circumstantial, but it points in one direction. An episode was written. It went far enough in production to warrant set photography, script copies, and executive supervision. Yet, for some reason, every trace afterward evaporated. No standard files, no public release, no archived episode. In effect, whatever content existed was scrubbed from the studio memory banks. Fans who postulated the episode's existence call it an exercise in tone policing. Even Hee Haw had done surreal sketches, but that remained in the wide open of television humor. A narrative about psychological compliance training with Gomer at its center may have alarmed CBS during the height of Vietnam and domestic psychological discourse. Soldiers undergoing testing and behavioral control, even fictionally, could be read as commentary. And during 1966, television executives often avoided any hint of critical representation of military operations. The gap in documentation, the missing script, the crossed-out language, all suggest something was produced, but it was covertly erased. What emerges is suspicion. CBS likely allowed parts of the episode to be filmed, but then killed the project during late review. The production materials remained, but were quietly reclassified as internal reference documents, placed in media marked not for distribution. Over time, public records had no mention. Unofficial collectors withheld screenshots to avoid legal trouble, and the studio pretended nothing different had existed. Thus, fans searching decades later find standard episode counts, intact syndication packages, and no official blacklists. But they also find the ghostly hole at position 150, the episode count, a missing slot, a blank code. In television, gaps matter, because whatever happened in camp later doesn't just vanish, it vanishes with the evidence. In the age of early internet fan forums, niche communities formed around unsolved mysteries and lost media. Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C., found such a community in the mid-2000s. One dedicated message board post, titled Gomer the Ghost Episode, focused specifically on identifying televisual gaps, discrepancies, and local TV listings from 1966. The interest ballooned when someone posted photocopies of the 1966 Raleigh affiliate schedule listing the unknown episode. Multiple forum members verified the clipping against microfilm archives. Within the threads, one contributor, user alias Marine Memory 65, claimed to have family who lived near El Paso and recorded the missing episode on an off-brand Ampex recorder. They uploaded brief audio snippets. In one, Jim Neighbors says, "You've been scheduled for a new assignment, something out of training," followed by an institutional siren jingle. Another recording captured a sergeant's voice, not typical of Sergeant Carter's tone, speaking about compliance evaluation. Users debated authenticity. forensic audio experts weighed in with analysis. Though indistinct, the waveforms differed significantly from standard Gomer Pyle audio. Background laughter was absent. Other users uncovered vintage promotional materials, including station promos for family-friendly reruns. In one black-and-white flyer from a Texas station, the listings included Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C., Season 3 backlog, but contained a handwritten note in faint pencil next to episode 150, reading, "Unconfirmed, call CBS." Whoever penciled that note had flagged the unknown. Then, in 2015, a user named Script Hunter posted collapsed versions of an allegedly leaked script fragment. The page is heavily redacted, but includes lines such as, "Gomer diagnosed with fatigue compliance syndrome," and "transfer to camp later." References are bracketed to personnel numbers, training codes, and gray-lined set directions for psychological evaluation room. Sterile. The page was quickly taken down after complaints claiming copyright infringement or defaming CBS. Still, screenshots survived, published on archive sites and enthusiast blogs. Users highlight that the page formatting matches CBS script-style guides from the 1960s. Though no full episode has surfaced, dozens of fans have contributed partial transcripts, scanned notes, or visual references. One collector offered to share a kinescope, but rescinded after alleged legal contact from anonymous copyright holders. Others reported hearing explanations from retired CBS workers who confirmed the episode had been shelved for being too serious, too unsettling, or too real for a comedy. In 2022, a Twitter thread resurfaced for the missing episode during a retro TV documentary broadcast. The host interviewed a man claiming to be a former CBS editor. He said, "I watched them label the film Can Camp Later and move it into the non-standard stacks. They did not want it aired. I took home the stills. They show no characters kissing pigs, no canned laughter, just uniformed Marines and blank walls." Enthusiasm from fans remains cautious. There's debate about whether the missing episode is a genuine lost artifact or a collective television hallucination, a show nobody ever made. But the volume of sources, the repeated local listings, the odd gaps in scripts, the credible audio snippets all suggest something once existed. And then, nobody would defend it. It wasn't bookmarked in history, it was excised, and fans continue chasing shadows. When no full episode reemerges, skeptics propose simpler explanations. Could the missing Camp Later legend be simply a misremembered piece? VD edits, missing musical cues, or edited scenes removed for syndication? CBS had a history of censoring or trimming episodes, music rights expired, jokes referenced drug use, or network sponsors objected to certain themes. Entire musical performances were often stripped, leading to discrepancies in episode runtimes and odd transitions. Indeed, some episodes of Gomer Pyle had scenes trimmed for reruns, church hymns replaced with generic music, dialogue about military discipline shortened, praises of Opry stars cut. If a Gomer episode included a deep sequence about compliance testing or psychological evaluation, it might have been partially aired, then trimmed heavily, leading to an experience so confusing a generation of viewers assumed an entire episode had been pulled. Some archivists suggest Camp Later may have been aired once in truncated form, with ominous scenes intact. Sweeping edits might have eliminated the more unsettling segments, leaving residual odd continuity. The laugh track could resume midline, with an abrupt jump backward in plot. Viewers unfamiliar with syndication edits might recall the fragments and interpret them as references to a full missing installment. Publishing discrepancies in DVD releases and streaming services have fueled this narrative. Fans chart timelines showing that Season 3 DVD box sets have anomalies. One episode under 19 minutes, followed by one over 32 minutes. Titles sometimes mislabel episodes, synopsis errors persist. Could those be vestiges of an excised sequence stitched into other episodes? Supporters point to overlapping scenes where Gomer appears to have missing context. Speaking of transfer, but no footage arriving, These oddities seem poorly explained by typical syndication editing. That said, the scope of erasure fans allege surpasses standard practice. Normally, rights issues or sponsor complaints led to cuts, not outright removal. Scripts for every known Gomer Pyle episode survived, typically released through public archives or writers' guilds. One missing script doesn't signify extraordinary censorship. It could mean the episode never reached final stage. But the existence of multiple independent sources referencing the work suggests otherwise. Even if a full episode never aired, the tone and plot intrigue fans precisely because it diverged from the show's usual absurdity. A Twilight Zone-like sliver embedded inside a goofy comedy doesn't just happen. Either someone sabotaged the narrative or someone conceded it wasn't worth preserving. Thus, the missing episode saga may still be plausible, not as mass erasure nor as synced editing, but as a single aborted narrative, crafted, partially executed, then censored. Whatever reality lies behind it, even that shadow of truth was enough to vanish from memory. So what remains? An urban legend built on gaps, a screenplay never used, a cancelled comedy elevated into mystery, and a voice, family, collectors, researchers, all repeating something was lost. Whether that something was ever intended for loss or protected from it remains the mystery. If there's one thing that keeps missing episode stories alive, it's silence. And CBS's treatment of the alleged Camp Later script has become a masterclass in institutional non-response. Despite hundreds of inquiries, no public statement from CBS acknowledges the existence of a shelved Gomer Pyle episode. In a 1998 interview with TV Land, a spokesperson responded to a fan's question about missing episodes with, "No such episode exists in our official listing." When questioned again in 2006 by a vintage TV magazine, another CBS representative said, "Any anomalies in early logs are likely misprints or placeholders." Yet that denial forgot one inconvenient fact. The replicated entries across multiple local schedules in November 1966 listing Gomer the Good Samaritan, a code name that doesn't appear in internal archives. What explains the silence? Mistake or meaning? Critics propose several interpretations. The most cynical suggests that CBS simply made a scheduling error in TV Guide and local papers. That would explain a ghost title. But replicating that across 4 regional editions in 2 consecutive weeks is commercially unlikely. Another explanation says the entry was a placeholder, common in TV planning, where scripts are pending and titles unknown. Even so, production agreements require consistent backup. Every placeholder script is eventually either completed or abandoned, but logged. Yet in this case, multiple insider sources claim to have seen script fragments that were later redacted. The oddity extends beyond listings. None of the standardized databases used by networks, writers' guilds, or licensing bodies list a 150th episode. CBS home video releases capped at 149 or 150 episodes, depending on counting errors, but none contain the rumored scenes. Even the restored streaming versions follow the same count. So if the episode was ever taped and partially aired, CBS has carefully avoided acknowledging it during every reissue or retrospective format. To some researchers, the silence feels less like error and more like tacit admission. The censorship theory gains traction. A CBS executive may have pulled the episode during post-production due to tonal dissonance, political climate, or fear of backlash. The lack of acknowledgement became, as conservative networks often practice, a method of elimination. If a segment is erased and never spoken of, it effectively disappears. In fan circles, silence is interpreted as proof. CBS never said it wasn't real. They just pretended not to know, reads one forum post. Another contributor paraphrased multiple calls to the CBS archive department. No record found, but if it exists, it's erroneously filed. That phrasing has appeared multiple times, almost identically, which raises eyebrows. How often can different operators fail to locate files the same way and produce identical language? When networks reacquire classic programming, they often sift master reels and recreate metadata. The standard episode list field is then cross-referenced with broadcast histories. One leak indicated that CBS's internal clean audit, conducted around 2005, flagged one reel with an incorrect audio track labeled GP67X, compliance. That tape was moved to a non-canonical storage bin and tagged not for broadcast. CBS subsequently edited it out from backups provided to syndicators and paid no residuals for it. If true, this would explain the silent erasure. Records show it existed once, but not in supply catalogs. Contrast that with the Opry and Oak Ridge Boys, whose names remain etched in brand borders. Sturban's voice was honored later. Gomer Pyle's possible missing episode remains a blank. It's not scandal, yet it's omission. What makes this omission stand out isn't whether CBS made mistakes. It's that its silence is consistent, deliberate, and repetitive. The more people ask, the more the record stays blank. That blankness becomes a message in itself. One of the most persistent elements in the missing episode lore is a rumored climactic scene, so out of character that nobody can quite confirm it occurred. Gomer, standing alone in a dim hallway, reflecting on duty, compliance, and the meaning of military life. No slapstick, no Sergeant Carter shouting. Just silence, blue lighting, and a subdued Jim Neighbors. Multiple fragments and descriptions of this scene survive. A web forum user submitted a transcript they claimed was recorded off-air. Why does a Marine wear uniform if he can't question himself? Sergeant? Another contributor shared an erased dialogue line. They say it's for your protection, but who watches over their own mindset? No laughter followed these lines. No studio applause echoed. The tones of these lines are strange in context of a comedic program, and that discrepancy may have led executives to balk at airing the entire sequence. The sound and mood were rumored to have been tested and found unsettling. In another rare clip, a faint background hum and military radio static underlines Gomer's monologue. A former technician, posting anonymously, confirmed that he saw a transfer labeled GP67X audio-only demo in emotion-neutral test. That labeling implies internal use only, maybe for evaluation by network sensors, but it was quickly pulled, never distributed to affiliates or syndicators. This scene has inspired speculation about whether Camp Later was a surreal interlude inserted as satire or an abortive attempt at a darker storyline. The theatrical staging, under a strict psychological testing motif, belongs more to St. Elsewhere or The Twilight Zone than to a 1960s sitcom. Its inclusion would have deviated sharply from Gomer's established character, portraying him wrestling with indoctrination and personal autonomy. Fans who perversely hope the recording survives treasure the memory. They collect fragments. A still photo showing Jim Neighbors wearing a hospital-style jacket walking a hallway, his footsteps echoing in an echo chamber corridor. They draw line maps connecting this corridor set to production logs for October 1966, an unusual set build in a known military comic production. Perhaps the most striking piece is a production wardrobe note that lists a behavioral test uniform, a simple olive ensemble with blank patches, never seen in standard episodes. That detail, innocuous in written form, becomes deeply symbolic to those seeking evidence of what existed. Whether the scene is entirely fictional, collective memory, or genuine unreleased footage, its specificity, clothing, dialogue, set design, suggests something was listed, described, and considered, but never aired. So what does it mean that a tonally darker Pyle episode was attempted and erased? That Gomer briefly questioned the absurdity even in his own life? That CBS pulled the plug on narrative danger? The missing episode becomes more than rumor. It becomes puzzle pieces pointing toward ambivalence about questioning in a comedy that thrived on unquestioned joy. In the modern era of fandom, nostalgia often clashes with obscure mystery, and Gomer Pyle is no exception. The show's brand remains sugary Americana, camaraderie, goofiness, small moral lessons. Yet the tantalizing possibility of a single dark episode cuts against that grain and draws attention. With DVD releases, streaming platforms, and nostalgia channels repackaging the show for new generations, larger questions arise. Why include episode 150 or not? Fans have lodged requests for note annotations. Episode 150 missing, due to tonal inconsistency. Industry archivists describe having lists of white label tapes with no metadata, some of which match the described period codes for Camp Later, but none have been made public. Contemporary collectors summit conventions to speak, share, and theorize. At retro TV festivals, panelists discuss the plausibility of such an episode surviving only in whispers. Enthusiasts compare this to other lost media myths, like missing Rod Serling pilots or Disney Vault films never public. Some argue that the Gomer Pyle mystery is unique because CBS never confirmed or denied. Its silence looms as loud as any scandal. Critically, the case illuminates how television preserves or erases its anomalies. If a creator or executive decides a segment is not for consumption, the episode might be shelved, redacted, then slowly forgotten. But viewers continue to occupy the gap, asking, if we remember fragments and gaps, who gets to decide what's forgotten? Since the early 2000s, at least 4 blogs have compiled evidence chronologically: misprinted listings, audio leaks, script fragments, still photos, eyewitness accounts of CBS staff. None of these prove the episode exists, but they collectively demand explanation. The intensity of readership spikes around shows like Chasing Gomer 2023 or Gray Reel Archive hints at enduring curiosity. In some ways, the missing episode defines Gomer Pyle as much as its visible episodes do. It's the whisper behind every laugh track. Fans imagine Jim Neighbors walking down a corridor alone, questioning compliance. They imagine CBS executives tossing script pages in a shred bin. And even if no footage remains, the memory of that guilt or erasure lives in fan consciousness. That's leverage. Silence becomes resistance. Nostalgia becomes commentary. The show, forever wholesome, now hides a shadow. Finally, the question that frames the entire mystery. What if Gomer Pyle had a secret? If Camp Later existed, what does it say about the show? That it flirted with moral complexity? That it risked mocking training systems or questioning authoritarian structures within a comedy series aimed at family audiences? For a network like CBS in 1966, during wartime sensitivity and cultural conservatism, such questioning, even implied, could be labeled too provocative. Some scholars believe the show had a brief window when it experimented with absurdism beyond the usual scope. A few episodes play on bureaucratic red tape, mistyped orders, or even existential ennui, but in sanitized humor. If Gomer entered a behavioral evaluation program in jest, depicted through standard sitcom tropes, it'd still mark a tonal shift, one CBS might shelve preemptively. Fans wonder, suppose Gomer had delivered lines questioning who watches the watchers? Suppose he'd turned inward? Suppose he'd recognized the absurdity not only in himself, but in systems meant to train and control? That departure would create confusion in syndication, sell as comedic gold at home, politically unsettling abroad. If CBS sensed the episode risked confusing overseas syndication markets or alienating affiliates in conservative regions, they might shutter it quietly. Better to vanish one episode than answer questions about its intent. After all, the concept of an errant episode meshes with a broader history. Networks have banned episodes of Star Trek, Black Mirror, Hee-Haw, fan-made banter scenes, even The Brady Bunch. And while most mainstream shows have patchwork variations, a sitcom lost entirely is rarer, especially one so mainstream. So what remains? Tangible proof or not, the audience's memory is real. The missing episode becomes auditorium myth, moral ambiguity hidden beneath comedic innocence. Gomer Pyle remains intact in syndicated form, but not in speculation. The speculation gives the show a deeper edge. Even decades later, viewers ask, could a man who never questioned authority stand alone, silent, in a reprogramming room? Maybe he could, and maybe he did, once, until CBS turned off the light. One misplaced title in TV Guide, a set of missing scripts. A reel logged, then vanished. The show was imaginative humor, but it may have briefly flirted with seriousness. If an episode truly existed and was pulled, it wasn't because it failed to entertain, but because it dared to question Gomer himself. Subscribe, comment, and reflect. What stories did television bury? And what truths still echo in the gaps?